I was halfway to the parking garage, still wearing my scrubs, and feeling that specific kind of exhaustion that settles in your lower back after 8 hours of assisting patients with hip replacements, when Sarah stopped me. Sarah was a charge nurse on Gerald's unit, a woman who always seemed to be vibrating at a frequency slightly higher than everyone else in the building. "Karen, just the person I wanted to see," she said, stepping into my path with a wide, efficient smile. "I just wanted to thank you for being so flexible with the timing for the unit get-together. I know it's a pain to shuffle things around on a Friday, but it really helped us out." I stopped and blinked, my brain still lagging. "The timing for what?" Sarah laughed, a short, bright sound. "The get-together. The potluck for the new residents. Christian said you and Gerald had already cleared the date. So he just went ahead and handled the sign-up sheet and the food coordination for you guys. It saved me so much time not having to go back and forth with everyone." I stood there for a second, the sliding glass doors of the hospital entrance letting in a gust of humid Detroit air. I didn't remember any potluck. I remembered Gerald mentioning something about the new guys a few days ago, but he'd been vague, something about a welcome event that might happen sometime soon. I hadn't agreed to anything. I hadn't cleared any dates. "I didn't realize there was a sign-up sheet," I said. "Oh, Christian has it all under control," Sarah said, already starting to back away toward the elevators. "He said you were totally on board with him taking the lead on the logistics. It's actually kind of sweet. Most wives would want to be the one organizing the menu, but you're just so easygoing about it." She waved and disappeared into the lobby. I stayed where I was, staring at the spot where she'd been. The date she'd mentioned, the 14th, was my sister's birthday dinner. We'd had that on the calendar for 3 weeks. I felt a small, sharp prick of confusion, but I didn't call Sarah back. I just stood there, wondering why Christian was the one talking to the charge nurse about my schedule. Christian had been our best friend for years. He was the kind of person who showed up with a toolbox and a bag of takeout when your water heater leaked or your laptop screen went black. 3 years ago, when my old sedan's electrical system started flickering out, he'd spent 2 full Saturdays in our driveway, grease up to his elbows, fixing it for free because he knew I couldn't afford a mechanic. He was a good man, and he and Gerald had a shorthand that I'd always found comforting. They could talk for an hour about nothing, and I could just exist in the room without feeling the need to fill the silence. But the idea of him handling the logistics for me and Gerald felt odd. Gerald was the unit coordinator. Coordinating was literally his job. He was the one who knew the staffing gaps and the payroll deadlines. Why would Christian, an IT specialist, who spent most of his day in a basement office, be the one telling the charge nurse that I was on board with a date I hadn't even heard of? I walked to my car and sat in the driver's seat, the engine idling. I thought about asking Gerald about it the moment he walked through the door, but then I remembered how he'd been lately. Stressed, impulsive, always trying to fix the nearest problem with a quick solution that usually just moved the mess somewhere else. If I brought it up, he'd probably just say Christian was helping him out, and I'd believe him because that was the familiar story. I put the car in reverse and backed out of the space, the birthday dinner on the 14th, still sitting there in my head, unmentioned and suddenly precarious. I didn't call him. I just drove home in silence. Gerald came home around 6, smelling like the hospital's industrial floor wax and old coffee. He didn't say much when he walked in, just gave me a quick kiss on the cheek and went straight to the mail pile on the entryway table. This was the one thing Gerald did better than anyone I'd ever known. He didn't just bring the mail in. He sorted it by urgency, filed the bills in the blue folder, and tossed the flyers before they could even touch the counter. It was a quiet, steady competence that usually made me feel like the house was under control, even when I was drowning in my own patient charts. I watched him from the kitchen, leaning against the sink. I waited until he'd finished with the mail and was heading toward the fridge for a beer. I ran into Sarah today, I said. Gerald didn't stop. The charge nurse? She's a whirlwind. I don't know how she keeps that unit from imploding. She thanked me for being flexible with the potluck, I said. The one on the 14th. Gerald paused, his hand on the refrigerator door. He didn't look at me, just stared at the magnets on the door for a second. Oh, right, the residence thing. I didn't know there was a potluck, Gerald, and I definitely didn't clear any dates. He finally looked at me, his expression one of mild confusion, like I was the one bringing up something irrelevant. Christian was helping me out. He's got the list on his phone. It was easier to let him coordinate the food and the timing since he's always on his computer anyway. Easier for who? Just easier, Karen. You know how he is. He likes to dive in and get things done. I felt a strange, hollow sensation in my chest. It wasn't a big revelation, but it was a gap. Sarah said he told her I was totally on board with him taking the lead. Why would he say that? Why would he be the one talking to the charge nurse about my schedule? Gerald sighed, a sound of genuine exhaustion. He stepped closer and put a hand on my shoulder, his thumb rubbing the fabric of my scrubs. He probably just meant we were okay with the event happening. He's just being Christian. He's always looking out for us. You know he's a good guy. He wasn't lying. Not in the way that felt like a secret. He genuinely seemed to believe that Christian's overreach was just a symptom of his friendship. But the on-board part stayed there, hanging between us. Gerald didn't explain how Christian knew my availability or why he felt comfortable speaking for me to a supervisor. He just smoothed over the edges of the conversation, treating my question like a minor misunderstanding that didn't require a real answer. The 14th is my sister's birthday dinner, I reminded him. We've had that on the calendar for 3 weeks. Gerald blinked. He looked at the calendar on the wall, then back at me. Oh, right, the dinner. He didn't apologize or ask how we could fix it. Instead, he stepped back and tapped his chin, his mind already jumping to the quickest exit. I'll just call her. We can move it to the 15th. Or maybe the weekend. She's usually flexible about that stuff, right? I'll just handle it. He started walking toward the living room to find his phone, already deciding the solution before I could even tell him that my sister had flown in specifically for that Friday. He was already fixing the problem by moving the piece of the puzzle that was easiest to shift without asking if the shift was actually possible. I stayed in the kitchen, listening to him dial her number in the other room, wondering when my life had become something Christian Haynes coordinated and Gerald James adjusted. Gerald came back into the kitchen a few minutes later, looking satisfied. He had that look he got whenever he thought he'd successfully navigated a bureaucratic hurdle at the hospital, a sort of smug relief that the paperwork was filed, even if the filing was sloppy. All set, he said, opening a cabinet to get a glass. She can do the 15th. She had a few things floating around that day, but she said she can make it work. Problem solved. I didn't feel the relief he did. I felt a slow, simmering irritation. My sister, Diane, didn't just make things work when it came to her travel. She planned her life in 15-minute increments, She had booked her flight and her hotel based on that Friday dinner. To Gerald, a date was just a placeholder that could be slid left or right to accommodate the path of least resistance. She didn't sound upset, I asked. Upset about what? It's a dinner, Karen. We're still having it. He leaned against the counter, sipping his beer. I don't know why you're so wound up about this. Christian was just trying to be helpful. He probably thought the 14th was open, because we hadn't talked about the potluck in a while. We hadn't talked about it at all, I said. Same thing, he replied, already drifting toward the living room. The next morning, my phone buzzed while I was helping a patient through a series of leg lifts. It was a text from Diane. Gerald said we're moving to the 15th. I can make it work, but I have to cancel my brunch with the girls. Is everything okay? I stared at the screen. I didn't answer her immediately. I just watched my patient, a retired postal worker named Mr. Henderson, struggle to keep his heel off the table. I felt a sudden, irrational urge to tell Mr. Henderson that my husband was being managed by our best friend. But I just corrected his posture and told him he was doing great. When I got home that evening, the trash and recycling bins were already at the curb. Gerald did that every Tuesday, rain or shine, without a single reminder. He had a system for the bins, the way they were angled, the way the lids were snapped shut. That was practically sacred to him. It was the one part of our domestic life where he was precise, where he didn't try to find a shortcut or fix a problem by ignoring the details. I watched him from the window, his silhouette against the streetlights, and I wondered why that competence didn't extend to the way he handled the people in his life. I went into the bedroom and found a small stack of papers on the nightstand. It was a printout of a menu for the potluck, tacos, a variety of salsas, and a list of who was bringing what. At the top, in a neat digital font, it said, "Coordinated by Christian H.I." Didn't touch the paper. I just looked at it. Christian had listed Gerald's famous chili and Karen's cornbread. I didn't make cornbread. I'd made it once, 6 years ago, and it had come out like a dense, salty brick. Gerald knew that. Christian, apparently, didn't. Or he had decided that the version of me that made cornbread was the one that fit the event better. Did you see the list? Gerald asked, walking in behind me. He sounded cheerful. Christian thinks the taco theme is a hit. He said everyone's really excited about the chili. I don't make cornbread, Gerald. He paused, his brow furrowing. What? Since when? Since always. You know I don't. Oh. He waved a hand dismissively. He probably just guessed. Or maybe he remembered that one time. It doesn't matter. We'll just bring something else. I'll tell him tomorrow. He didn't offer to call Christian right then. He didn't ask why Christian felt comfortable assigning me a dish I didn't make. He just stepped around me to take off his shoes, leaving the list on the nightstand like a small, printed lie. I sat on the edge of the bed and picked up my phone. I started to type a message to Diane, telling her to keep the 14th, but I stopped. I didn't want to be the one to undo Gerald's fix again. I just locked the screen and put the phone face down on the mattress. Christian stopped by on Thursday evening, around the time the streetlights were just starting to hum. He didn't call first, but that was just how he operated. He'd been in our lives long enough that he treated our front door like his own. He came in through the garage, carrying a heavy-duty plastic bin of supplies for the potluck, looking as cheerful and effortless as always. Evening, you two, he said, setting the bin down on the kitchen floor with a loud thud. I brought the industrial-sized foil pans and the warming trays. I figured we wouldn't want to risk using your good ceramic ones if the chili gets too hot. I was standing by the counter, drying a bowl. "Thanks, Christian." "No problem at all," he said, leaning back against the counter. He looked at me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Or maybe it did, and I just couldn't tell anymore. "Anyway, I wanted to let you know I've got the airport run covered for Diane. Gerald mentioned you were feeling a bit burnt out with the double shifts this week, so I told him I'd just swing by Metro and pick her up on Friday afternoon. Save you the trip." I stopped scrubbing the bowl. The towel stayed pressed against the porcelain. I had spent the last 2 days looking forward to that drive. It was the only hour I'd have alone with my sister before the chaos of the birthday weekend started. I didn't say I was too burnt out to pick up my sister. I said. Christian laughed, a light, breezy sound. I know. But Gerald said you were exhausted. He was worried you'd be running on fumes. I just told him, "Don't sweat it, I'm already heading that way for a thing. I'll just grab her. It's a win-win." I looked over at Gerald, who was in the living room, half watching a game on TV. He didn't even look up, just gave a vague wave of his hand. "He's doing us a favor, Karen. It's just easier. You can just relax and have the house ready when they get here." "I don't need the house ready," I said, my voice sounding thin to my own ears. "I want to see my sister." Christian shifted his weight, his expression, turning into something like mild concern. "I mean, if you really want to do it, I can just... not. I just thought I was helping." Gerald and I talked it through, and we figured it was the most efficient way to handle the logistics. There it was again. Logistics. The word felt like a wall. He and Gerald had talked it through, and in the process they had decided what I needed, how I felt, and how my time should be spent. The win-win was that Christian got to feel like the hero and Gerald didn't have to deal with me being tired. I was the only one not winning. I remembered the way Christian had spent those 2 Saturdays in the driveway 3 years ago. The way he'd meticulously cleaned the battery terminals on my car without me even asking. He was a good man. He had always been the one to step in when things were breaking. But now it felt like he was trying to fix things that weren't broken. Or maybe he was just trying to replace the parts of our marriage that he found inefficient. "I'll pick her up," I said. Christian blinked, then shrugged, the smile returning. "Totally fine. I just didn't want you stressing. I'll just cancel the alert on my phone." He didn't ask why I wanted to do it. He didn't apologize for assuming. He just treated my objection like a minor change in a schedule he was still managing. After he left, the house felt too quiet. Gerald finally stood up and walked into the kitchen, glancing at the bin of foil pans. "You didn't have to be so sharp with him," Gerald said. "He's just trying to be a pal. Since when does being a pal involve deciding who picks up my sister from the airport?" "It's not a big deal, Karen. He was just helping." Gerald reached over and patted my arm, but he was already looking past me toward the fridge. He didn't see the gap. He just saw a problem that he'd tried to solve, and he was annoyed that the solution hadn't taken. I went to the living room and sat on the sofa, staring at the blank screen of the TV. I didn't call Diane to tell her the plan had changed back. I just sat there in the silence, wondering what else Christian and Gerald had talked through while I was at work. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a text from Christian. "All good. I've deleted the reminder. See you Friday for the taco madness." Friday morning felt like a countdown. The house was already humming with the kind of frantic, misplaced energy that usually preceded one of Gerald's efficient plans. By 10, the kitchen counter was occupied by a slow cooker full of chili that smelled slightly too much like cumin, and a stack of those industrial foil pans Christian had dropped off was leaning against the dishwasher. Gerald was in a mood of quiet satisfaction. He'd spent the morning checking the weather for the airport run and confirming the taco madness timeline with Christian. He didn't ask me if I was still okay with the plan. He just assumed the machinery was moving. I told Christian you'd probably be back from Metro around 4, Gerald said, leaning over the pot to stir the chili. He said he'd swing by at 4:30 to help me get the warming trays set up. That way, everything's hot right when the residents start drifting in. I was nursing a cup of coffee, staring at the living room. I'm picking up Diane at 3. Depending on the traffic on I-94, we might not be back by 4. It's fine, Gerald said, not looking up. Christian's got the timing down. He's already coordinated the arrival of the other dishes. We're on a schedule, Karen. It'll be easier if we just stick to it. I didn't argue. I had learned that arguing with Gerald when he was in coordinator mode was like trying to stop a landslide with a handheld fan. He wasn't listening to me. He was listening to the plan he and Christian had built. I left for the airport at 2. The drive was gray and humid, the kind of Detroit afternoon where the sky looks like a wet sidewalk. When I finally saw Diane walking through the arrivals gate, she looked tired but happy, clutching a small carry-on and a bag of overpriced airport chocolates. "You look exhausted," she said, pulling me into a hug. "Is everything okay?" Gerald's texts were, "I don't know." He sounded like he was managing a construction site, not a birthday weekend. I pulled her toward the parking garage. He's just being Gerald, and he's got a lot of help these days. As we drove back toward the city, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was a text from Gerald. "Christian is heading over. ETA 4:15. You guys almost home?" I looked at the phone, then at Diane, who was telling me about a project she was leading at her firm. I thought about the schedule. I thought about the cornbread I wasn't making and the logistics that had moved my sister's birthday dinner by 24 hours. I thought about how Christian had decided I was burnt out and therefore incapable of a 1-hour drive. I didn't text back. I didn't tell Gerald we were stuck in traffic, and I didn't tell him we were making good time. I just turned the phone face down. "Do you want to go get a drink first?" I asked Diane. "Just a quick one. There's a place near the hotel that has those appetizers you like." Diane blinked. "Now, I thought you were in a rush to get back for some work thing." "I'm not in a rush," I said. It was a small choice, a tiny detour, but it felt like the first thing I had actually owned all week. I didn't tell Gerald we were stopping. I didn't check in to see if the warming trays were ready or if the residents were arriving early. I just let the schedule break. We stayed at the lounge for nearly 2 hours. We talked about her kids, the house she was renovating, and the way our mother had been acting lately. I felt a strange quiet lightness, knowing that somewhere in our kitchen, a man was probably staring at a clock, and another man was wondering where. When we finally pulled into the driveway at 6:30, the house was glowing with an anxious yellow light. I walked through the front door to find Christian standing in the middle of the kitchen, holding a stack of napkins and looking genuinely bewildered. Gerald was beside him, frantically stirring the chili, which had developed a thick, burnt crust around the edges of the slow cooker. "Where were you?" Gerald asked, his voice tight. "Christian's been trying to coordinate the arrival of the appetizers, but he didn't know if you'd already set out the drinks. We've been texting you for an hour." "We stopped for a drink," I said, my voice flat. I didn't apologize. Christian stepped forward, his smile strained. "We were just worried, Karen. I actually called the airport to make sure Diane's flight hadn't been delayed. I almost drove back out there to check. I looked at the burnt chili and the man who had tried to map out my afternoon. The residents were already beginning to arrive, their voices drifting in from the porch. But for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel the need to rush and fix the mess. The residents started filtering in, a group of young, eager people in their late 20s who looked like they'd never had a bad day in their lives. They brought a kind of loud, nervous energy that filled the living room quickly, their voices overlapping in a blur of medical jargon and polite introductions. Gerald immediately shifted into his coordinator persona, greeting them with a practiced, hospitable smile, while Christian hovered just behind him, like a silent partner managing the flow of the room. Tacos are in the kitchen, drinks are on the sideboard, Christian announced to a small group of them, his voice carrying that same breezy authority. Gerald's chili is just finishing up. We've got everything laid out for you. I stood by the door with Diane, watching them. I felt like a guest in my own house, or perhaps a piece of furniture that had been moved to make room for a more efficient layout. Diane leaned in, her voice a low whisper. Is it just me, or is that man acting like he owns the place? He's a family friend, I said. I didn't say best friend. The word felt too heavy, too inaccurate for the way he was currently operating. Gerald caught my eye from across the room. He looked stressed, his forehead creased, but he gave me a quick, pleading look, the one that meant, please just play along so this goes smoothly. I didn't play along. I didn't go into the kitchen to help with the napkins or the drinks. I didn't offer to take the coats. I just stayed where I was, holding my sister's hand. Eventually, the smell of the burnt chili became impossible to ignore. It wasn't a smoky scent. It was a bitter, acrid smell that cut through the aroma of the taco seasoning. Gerald noticed it first. He hurried back to the slow cooker, his movements impulsive and hurried. I watched him try to scrape the blackened crust off the sides with a plastic spoon, a clumsy, frantic effort to erase the evidence of his distraction. I've got it, Gerald muttered, more to himself than anyone else. It's just a little caramelization. It'll be fine. Maybe we should just toss the bottom layer, Christian suggested, stepping in. He didn't take the spoon, but he leaned over Gerald's shoulder, his presence crowding the small space. If we move the rest to a fresh pan, no one will notice. I can help you sift through it. I watched them work together, two men huddled over a pot of ruined meat, coordinating a rescue mission for a meal that didn't actually matter. They were so synchronized in their panic that it felt choreographed. It was the same shorthand they used for everything. The quick fix, the shared secret, the mutual agreement that the easiest path was the right one. Diane watched them for a moment, then looked at me. I'm going to go find the bathroom, she said, though she didn't move. She was waiting for me to say something, to break the circuit. I didn't. I just watched Gerald accidentally splash a bit of brown grease onto the white countertop. He cursed under his breath and grabbed a paper towel, scrubbing at it with a force that nearly smeared the stain deeper into the laminate. Karen, could you grab the extra bowls from the pantry? Gerald called out, his voice strained. The ones in the top cabinet? I didn't move. I remembered the list on the nightstand. Karen's cornbread. I remembered the logistics of my sister's arrival. I remembered the way Christian had decided I was too tired to drive. I think Christian has the logistics handled, Gerald, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it was clear enough to cut through the chatter of the residents. The room didn't go silent, but the energy shifted. Gerald stopped scrubbing the counter. He looked at me, his expression a mix of confusion and genuine irritation. Christian paused, his hand still hovering near the slow cooker. He looked at me and smiled, that same effortless, helpful smile, but it didn't reach his eyes this time. "It's okay, Karen," Christian said softly. "I can get the bowls. No need to stress." "I'm not stressing," I replied. I turned back to Diane and whispered, "Let's go sit on the porch for a minute." As we walked away, I heard the sound of the plastic spoon hitting the side of the pot with a sharp, metallic clink. I didn't look back to see who was holding it. I just stepped outside into the humid Detroit evening and closed the door behind me, leaving the coordination to the experts. The residents left around 9, leaving behind a graveyard of half-empty plastic cups and a lingering scent of scorched beef. Gerald looked like he'd run a marathon in a sauna, his shirt clinging to his back, his expression a mixture of relief and lingering agitation. Christian stayed longer than the others, lingering in the kitchen to help Gerald pack the leftovers into the foil pans. He did it with a quiet, methodical efficiency, his movements synchronized with Gerald's in a way that made me feel like I was watching a rehearsal of a play I hadn't been cast in. "I'll take these to the fridge for you," Christian said, his voice returning to that helpful, breezy tone. I was leaning against the doorframe, watching them. "Why do you do it, Christian?" He paused, a heavy pan of chili in his hands. He looked at me, and for the first time, the smile didn't even try to form. He looked tired. "Do what?" "The logistics, the scheduling, the deciding what I'm capable of doing on a Tuesday afternoon." Christian shifted his weight. He didn't look at Gerald. I like knowing where things stand, Karen. I like being the one who has the answer. It's easier that way. For everyone. It wasn't a confession, and it wasn't an apology. It was just a small, honest admission of a void. He lived in a basement office and went home to a quiet house. He'd grafted himself onto our lives because he liked the feeling of being essential. He hadn't set out to dismantle my place in my own marriage. He had just treated our boundaries like outdated software that needed an update. Gerald sighed, stepping in to pat Christian on the back. "He's just a good friend, Karen. Let it go." I didn't let it go, but I didn't argue. I went to the bedroom and sat at the small desk in the corner. I remembered a comment Christian had made a few months ago about cleaning up Gerald's digital files and updating his hospital portal settings to streamline things. At the time, I'd thought it was just more of his IT generosity. I logged into the shared family computer and opened the hospital's employee portal, using the password Gerald had written on a sticky note inside the blue folder. I navigated to the emergency contact and administrative proxy section. There it was. Under the primary contact for urgent notifications and administrative coordination, Christian's name and cell phone number were listed first. I was second. In the notes section, Christian had written, "Primary coordinator for scheduling and logistic." He hadn't just been helping Gerald. He had formally inserted himself into the professional and personal infrastructure of Gerald's life. He had made himself the gatekeeper. I didn't wake Gerald up to ask about it. I didn't scream. I just opened a new email and addressed it to the unit manager and the HR coordinator. "Please update the administrative proxy and emergency contact for Gerald James." I wrote, "I am the primary contact. Please remove Christian Haynes from the proxy list effective immediately. Thank you." I hit send. The next morning, the house was quiet. Gerald was in the bathroom, the shower running, and the kitchen was still cluttered with the remnants of the taco madness. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from Christian. "Hey, just checking in. I noticed the portal access changed this morning. Did something glitch? I can jump on and fix it for you." I didn't reply. I walked to the kitchen, picked up the last of the foil pans, and put them in the recycling bin. I didn't check to see if Gerald was coming out of the bathroom or if he was angry. I just started making a pot of coffee, the sound of the machine filling the silence of a house that was finally, marginally, my own again.